Hello everyone, this is Mariana, and today I'm here to talk to you guys about the books that I read in the months of September and October 2018. Some of these I have actually recorded in-depth reviews for, and when I have, I'll tell you guys and I'll link the full reviews down below. But mostly these are books that I just want to chat to you guys about and that require no actual in-depth reviews. So let's get started. So the first book I have to show you guys is one I actually did an in-depth review for slash rent because so many things about it got in the way of such a great story, and it's The Widow by Fiona Barton. This is a story of a woman who used to be married, her husband just died, and while alive he was accused of committing this terrible crime, and she had to lie to the police and to journalists and stuff to sort of defend him. And now that he's gone, she wonders whether or not to keep defending him and whether or not to tell the truth. Now, this is an interesting premise, and as I said in my in-depth review, it gets ruined by the form the book is told. Maybe other people don't think that it gets in the way, but I thought it was so weird that from the very beginning we know which crime was committed and basically whether or not the guy did it. It's also a bit weird how this main character is supposed to be super smart according to the perception of other characters about her, and yet she always acts like such a regular person. You never see everything that you're told is not actually shown in the narrative, and that's sort of annoying. But yeah, I thought this was a great story that got ruined by the way it was told, and if you want to check my in-depth review for it, I will put that link down below and you guys can go and check that out. Next, I finally finished reading It by Stephen King, this humongous book. I had started it last year and finally got around to finishing it, and I loved it. I also did an in-depth review for this because it deserves it. It's the equivalent of an epic but with horror, and it's beautiful. It's this story about a town and about growing up and about fear and conquering fear and love and just basic human themes. Stephen King manages to make reality more scary than, the horrors, the demons that walk amongst the characters. The human aspect of the story is so much scarier. Growing up is shown in such a beautiful yet scary way, just as it is, and it's beautiful and brilliant, and I hope more people get to read this. It's huge, of course, but it's also a very, very worthy read. The last book I have an in-depth review for is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I had seen this being quite well described around BookTube, but I honestly thought that, of course, it's a great story, it's very entertaining, but the writing is so bad. Like, it actually gets in the way of the story. It kept distracting me. He writes in a very fragmented way with little tiny sentences, and it really got in the way at times. And not a single character has a known voice in this. They're basically the same person. But I still thought that the actual plots, like the story, was so good and so entertaining, and you just really wanted to find out what happened, all the implications of what was going on, that it was just worth it. This is the story of a guy who is a scientist. He works at this college. He leads this regular life. He's married to a woman and he has a son. And one day he goes to a bar, and when he comes back, he is knocked down. And when he wakes up, he is not in his world anymore. He finds out that he is living a completely different life. In this world in which he wakes up, he is the super top scientist who made this groundbreaking discovery. And his wife, he's not married, he doesn't have a son. So having such vivid memories of his former life, he decides to he needs actually to find out what happened and how to get back to his former life, and actually which one is true. it's a very interesting read. I don't recommend this if you're not into sci-fi. This is not the sort of thriller that is completely based on crime or stuff like that. And I also don't recommend it if you've read previous Blake Crouch's book, other Blake Crouch books, and you haven't liked his style, because from what I've read, he has always written like this, in this very fragmented way, and it's really annoying. Like, I loved the story, but I won't pick up another Blake Crouch book until I find out that he has stopped writing this way. Then I read The Hazelwoods by Melissa Albert, and this was so cool. This has received very mixed reviews throughout BookTube, so I was very hesitant to get into it and didn't know what I was going to think about it, but it's so good. Like, people keep complaining about how the protagonist is unlikable, but there is a reason for her being unlikable. It's actually in the story, and it's... I loved it. It tells the story of a girl named Alice who, ever since she was a child, kept running away with her mother every time bad luck found them. They would always move to a place, and then something would end up happening as if bad luck were catching up to them, and they'd have to move. So Alice is the granddaughter of a writer of these sort of very dark, eerie fairy tales that have this sort of cult following. She's not super famous, but she has these very devoted fans. Alice and her mother think that after her grandmother has passed away, they can finally rest and stop at a place and just keep their guard down. And just as they do that, Alice's mother is kidnapped, and she has to join forces with this kid at her school who is a huge fan of her grandmother's, so that they can sort of piece together clues from her stories to try and find out what exactly happened to her mother and how to get her back. So this is in great part set in New York, right? It's not the sort of fantasy that starts in a fantastical sort of medieval world and continues in that. It's greatly urban fantasy, but it's so entertaining. It's written in this very dark way, in this very matter-of-factly way, even when horrific stuff happens. It does get very dark at times, and it just makes sense because fairy tales are incredibly dark and cruel and nonsensical. Then I read a book on my Kindle, and it was An Ocean of Minutes. I'm going to put the cover here. It's a story, it's a sort of sci-fi-ish story about a woman who has this boyfriend. They're living in the 60s, I think, and there's this epidemic. And for him to get treatment, she volunteers to this program in which people are sent to work in the future. And if she gets sent to the future to work at this place, his medical bills are going to be covered. And they have set up this day and place to meet in the future. But what happens is that once she's in the shuttle, she gets sent not to that year, but to a couple of years after that. And when she arrives, she's desperate because how does she know that every Friday or whatever for God knows how many years he has been waiting for her, and she has to figure out a way to meet him. Also, she finds out that the future is very much not what she expected and quite different from where she's from. And it's a great premise, and it starts off interestingly, but I felt like it got too stuck in this character's journey to adapt and stuff, and not, I don't know, I mean, developing her. She is almost just a cardboard piece left there to sort of face the consequences of the future. She's not given a proper personality. She doesn't grow from the beginning of the story to end. We're not given enough reasons to like this couple. Even the flashbacks are like, meh, you know, why should I care about them? It was honestly just an okay book. It was a 2 out of 5 stars at best. I don't recommend this to anyone. I don't know who the audience for this might be. It was just very forgettable, and with such an interesting premise, I had expected it to be a lot better. The end was maybe a glimpse into what the book could have been, but it's just as it was not great. However, my next read was super awesome, and that was The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. Now, I know that this has received so much hype over the year, but it is very much worth it. The Woman in the Window tells the story of this woman who has agoraphobia, and she lives inside her house all by herself. Her husband and child are living elsewhere, and she basically spends her day in either the internet or by her window watching her neighbors through a camera. And I know what you're thinking, right? Rear Window. And I was like, how is the author going to get away from basically using the same premise of Rear Window? And he did it by making the main character very much a fan of noir films and classic movies and Hitchcock and stuff. So that was great. And he also gave it a very different story from Rear Window. Like the crime and stuff, the mystery is very different. So she's just sitting there by the window one day when she believes she sees this crime being committed. And from then on, she drives herself insane. She just knows that thing happened, and people keep telling her that it didn't happen, and it's basically just putting pieces together to find out what happened. And let me tell you something. I had actually figured out from very early on who might have been the culprit, and it's still such a great surprising read because of the way everything is sort of developed and wrapped up together, and how the pieces fall in place. Like, even if you get this hint about what happened, you don't really know exactly what happened. You don't know how all these different tiny pieces that the author puts in place fall together and actually make sense. But once it does, it's so surprising, and the development is so interesting that honestly, I cannot forget the ending of this book anytime soon, because it's just so movie-like. Now, obviously, it's not a perfect book. It has its flaws. It's not brilliantly written, it doesn't have like majestic prose or anything. And there are times that are a bit weird, like, I don't think that if you're about to have sex, you're thinking about pieces of poetry and stuff like that. Like, you don't need to do that sort of stuff to tell me that a character is smart. I could tell that she was smart without, randomly thinking about poetry in weird moments and stuff. But just these minor flaws are easily ignored if you consider that the story is so thrilling and enticing, and that the development and the evolution of the story is so interesting. Honestly, 5 out of 5 stars for me. A thriller doesn't have to be perfect to get 5 out of 5 stars for me. It just has to be awesome and entertaining and surprising, and this was every single one of those things. I cannot recommend this enough if you're a fan of thrillers. After that, I read Never Will Wake by, what's her name? Marisha Pesso. I have another book of hers here. And this was the story of a bunch of kids who had this friend, and this friend of theirs died, supposedly committed suicide a year ago. And they've sort of disbanded, and the girl who used to date the guy that died goes to this sort of birthday party with the rest of them, and then they sort of find themselves stuck in purgatory. That's the best way I can describe it. They're forced to relive the same day again and again and again until something happens. It's explained in the book, but I don't want to give too much in. And basically, when they're all together, they sort of figure out that they're all lying about different aspects of the guy's death and about different aspects of their story together. So they have to figure out who's telling the truth and who's lying, and the ways in which it affects their relationships and, well, each other is so interesting. The characters are very well developed. They have very unique personalities, and they're insufferable, as most teenagers are, I guess, but they're so bad. Like, they're so Ah, God damn it, what's that word that Holden Caulfield uses? Phony, that's it. They're phony as hell. They're so annoying. Like they're quoting poetry all the time and saying very beautiful, quirky things that you just know they have no way of having thought at the moment. You know, they're very annoying characters and very bad people, but also very charming people in the end. You sort of get to know their personalities and understand where all of this comes from. And in the end, it was a very interesting experience. I very much disliked that after the ending, there was this sort of addendum, I'd say, this postscriptum that was very preachy, like live your life, man, and you only live once, and stuff like that. And it sort of took the joy out of the book a bit, but it's a decent young adult mystery. Possibly one of the best I've read. The genre is not very good at reproducing thrillers, but it's interesting enough, and it was very entertaining. So I guess it's a 3.5 or 4 out of 5 stars, mostly a 3.5 out of 5 stars. If you're into thrillers and into YA, I guess it's a cool read. It's an entertaining read, at least. After that, and I guess that's the last book I have to talk to you guys about, I finished reading actually, Ursula K. Le Guin's The Wind's 12 Quarters. This is a collection of short stories, and the reason I read this was because I'm a fan of BTS, and one of their videos references The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas, which is one of the short stories in this book. And I think the one before the last short story, and by far the best short story in the book. This has all sorts of stories. There are the ones that are purely sci-fi in the most sci-fi sense of the word, like very scientific and exploring what it means to be a scientist and what it means to seek the truth. There are others that are very much derived from Le Guin's other books, like the Earthsea cycle. And some of these are very much independent and based on ethics and morality, and I think that's where she shines the most. Some of these are very, very brilliant. Some were a bit too experimental to me, I'd say. Like, I finished it and was okay, so that was it. But mostly, I thought they were very interesting and great food for thoughts. You know, I feel like even after I finished reading the book, some of these stories have stuck with me, and I keep thinking about them again and again and again. Especially Omelas. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. It's like 3 pages long, and it has such an impact on you once you've read it. I very much recommend this. It's my first book by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I very much want to read everything else by her. If you've actually already read something by her, please let me know where to get started, because I honestly have no idea. And she wrote so many books, so I don't even know where to start. So these were the books I read in the months of September and October. Let me know if you read any of them and what you thought of them. And yeah, if you like this video, please click the like button and subscribe if you want to see more in the future. Bye!